The sudden blackout. The starship Eclipse was one of humanity's finest vessels, a sleek, cutting-edge marvel of engineering that cruised the stars with ease. It carried a diverse crew, humans and aliens working side by side to explore the far reaches of the galaxy. But all of that confidence shattered in an instant. The blackout hit without warning. Mark Williams, a human engineer, was in the middle of inspecting the ship's secondary coolant systems when the lights above him flickered. He barely had time to glance up before the entire ship plunged into darkness. A deep silence followed, eerie and unnatural. The familiar hum of the ship's engines, a comforting sound that never stopped, was gone. Mark felt his stomach twist. For the Eclipse to go completely dark meant something catastrophic had occurred. Emergency systems should have kicked in by now, he muttered, his voice echoing off the walls of the cramped corridor. Just as he was fumbling for his flashlight, the emergency lights blinked on, casting a dim red glow over everything. They weren't comforting. They painted the ship in shadows, making every corner seem alive. Williams, a sharp voice snapped through his personal communicator. Mark groaned. He didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. Velza, he replied flatly. Velza was the ship's alien technician, a member of the Zrix race. She was meticulous, brilliant, and utterly insufferable in Mark's opinion. The two of them had clashed since day one. "I'm assuming you've noticed the blackout," Velza said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Or do humans need a full tutorial to understand darkness?" Mark rolled his eyes, his frustration overriding his fear for a moment. "Yeah, I noticed. What do you want?" "Captain's orders," she said. "You and I are being reassigned. The ship's systems are down. The AI is offline, and the main engine room is locked out. We're the closest to the auxiliary systems, so we're stuck investigating." Mark exhaled sharply. "Fantastic. Stuck with you during a crisis. Just my luck." "You're not my first choice either, Williams," Velza retorted. Within minutes, they met in a shared crew room near the ship's midsection. The room was small, barely large enough for two people, with basic bunks and a small console for communications. The dim emergency lights made the place feel claustrophobic. Mark entered first, lugging his toolkit. Velza arrived moments later, her tall, slender frame and deep purple skin making her look otherworldly in the crimson glow. Her large, reflective eyes narrowed at him. "Let's get this over with," she said, folding her arms. "Trust me, I'm not thrilled about this either," Mark replied, setting his tools down. "First things first, why hasn't the AI rebooted yet? It's supposed to handle emergencies like this automatically." Velza pulled a handheld scanner from her belt, its sleek Zrixian design humming softly as it activated. "That's what we're here to find out. But don't expect miracles. This blackout is strange." "Strange how?" Velza hesitated, something rare for her. She glanced at her scanner. "The energy readings are inconsistent. It's almost like something is disrupting the ship's systems on purpose." Mark frowned. "That doesn't make any sense. Nothing should be able to take down the Eclipse like this. Unless," Velza said slowly, "it's not a random malfunction." Before Mark could respond, a faint sound caught his attention. It was distant but distinct, a low, rhythmic tapping. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice dropping. Velza tilted her head, her sensitive Zrixian ears twitching. "Yes, it's probably the cooling systems shutting down." Mark shook his head. "No, that's not a mechanical sound. It's footsteps." Velza raised an eyebrow. "Footsteps? Don't be ridiculous. Who would be wandering the ship during a blackout?" Mark didn't answer. The tapping grew louder for a moment, then stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Velza tightened her grip on her scanner. "Fine, let's investigate. But if this turns out to be a waste of time—" Yeah, I'll owe you one," Mark interrupted, grabbing his flashlight. The two of them stepped into the corridor, their footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The emergency lights barely illuminated the path ahead, and the shadows seemed to shift with every movement. As they moved deeper into the ship, the tapping noise returned, fainter now, but unmistakable. Mark's grip on his flashlight tightened. Still think it's the cooling systems. Velza didn't respond. For the first time, her confident demeanor cracked, and Mark noticed the slightest hint of unease in her expression. The two of them stopped at a junction where the noise seemed to have originated. Mark pointed his flashlight down the corridor to the left. It was empty. Then the noise came again, this time from behind them. Mark and Velza spun around, their eyes locking onto the source of the sound. But there was nothing there. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Velza broke the silence. "Let's move faster." Mark nodded, and the two of them hurried down the corridor, their earlier animosity temporarily forgotten. Whatever was happening on the eclipse was bigger than either of them had imagined, and it had only just begun. Strange signals. Velza stared at the dimly glowing console in their cramped quarters, her long fingers tapping rhythmically on her handheld scanner. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mark sat slouched on the edge of his bunk, flicking through a manual on his tablet, though his restless leg bouncing gave away his nerves. "Stop that," Velza said without looking up. "Your nervous energy is vibrating the entire room." Mark snorted. "You're one to talk. You've been mumbling to that scanner for 20 minutes. What's it saying? That we're doomed." Velza paused. "No, but it is picking up something unusual." Mark leaned forward, suddenly interested. "Unusual how?" She tilted the scanner toward him. "There's a faint signal, a low-frequency pulse, coming from within the ship. It wasn't there before the blackout." Mark frowned. "A signal? From where?" "The systems are down, so nothing should be transmitting." Velza shook her head, her dark eyes narrowing as she focused on the device. "It's not from any part of the ship I recognize. This isn't normal engineering chatter. The signal's intermittent, like a heartbeat." Mark raised an eyebrow. "A heartbeat? That's a creepy way to put it." "I don't care if it's creepy," Velza snapped. "What matters is finding the source. If it's causing the blackout, we need to stop it." Mark sighed and pushed himself off the bunk. "All right, let's trace it. You lead, alien genius." Velza gave him a withering look but didn't argue. She opened the room's door cautiously and peeked into the dim hallway. The emergency lights painted everything in a haunting red, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of her scanner. The two moved down the corridor together, Velza focusing on the scanner while Mark kept his flashlight trained ahead. Every shadow seemed to flicker, and the faint echo of their footsteps made the ship feel larger and emptier than it really was. "So," Mark whispered after a while, trying to ease the growing tension, "what's your brilliant theory?" "Rogue signal from a malfunctioning relay." "I gone nuts." Velza didn't answer right away, her brow furrowed as she studied the scanner's readings. "No, this isn't mechanical. The signal feels intentional." Mark stopped walking. "Intentional? Are you saying someone, or something, is sending it?" Velza turned to face him, her usually sharp tone softened by a rare hint of unease. "I'm saying I don't know, but it's not random noise, that's for sure." Before Mark could reply, the signal grew stronger. Velza's scanner let out a faint beep, and she adjusted its settings, eyes narrowing. "It's close. Just ahead." They reached a sealed hatch leading to one of the lower cargo holds. The signal was strongest here, a steady, rhythmic pulse that seemed to vibrate through the metal walls. Mark inspected the hatch. This section should have been locked down during the blackout. "How's the signal coming from inside?" Velza shrugged. "I don't know. The scanner can't penetrate the door." Mark frowned and set his flashlight down, pulling out a small toolkit from his belt. "Well, let's find out." "Careful," Velza warned. Mark ignored her, prying open the control panel beside the hatch. Wires dangled loosely, sparking faintly. The sight made his stomach churn. These circuits look fried. Whatever caused the blackout hit this area hard. Just get the door open, Velza said, her voice tense. Mark grumbled under his breath as he worked. After a few moments, there was a hiss of escaping air as the hatch unlocked. The door slid open a crack, just enough for them to see inside. What the? Mark started, but Velza silenced him with a sharp gesture. The room beyond was pitch black, save for a faint green glow coming from the far corner. It was pulsing in sync with the signal on Velza's scanner. Mark grabbed his flashlight and shone it into the room. Stacked crates cast long, ominous shadows, and the green glow seemed to shift, almost like it was alive. Velza stepped inside cautiously, her scanner held out in front of her. Mark followed, gripping a wrench like a weapon. As they approached the glow, Velza's scanner began to beep faster. "It's some kind of device," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The object was small, no bigger than a shoebox, and covered in intricate alien markings that neither of them recognized. It emitted a low hum, the sound deep and unsettling. "What is it?" Mark asked, keeping his distance. Velza shook her head. "It's not Srixian. And it's definitely not human." Mark's flashlight flickered, and the hum grew louder. The device suddenly emitted a burst of light, forcing them to shield their eyes. When the light faded, the room was silent again. But something was different. Mark's voice was unsteady. "Tell me you felt that." Velza nodded, her gaze fixed on the device. "I felt it. Like something passed through us." Before they could process what had just happened, the rhythmic tapping they'd heard earlier returned. But this time, it was much closer. Mark's grip tightened on the wrench. "We need to leave. Now." Velza didn't argue. The two of them backed toward the door, their eyes scanning the shadows. The tapping stopped just as they reached the corridor. The hatch slammed shut behind them, and Mark swore under his breath. "This is more than just a blackout." Velza nodded grimly. "Something's on this ship, and it doesn't want us here." The hidden compartment. The air in the cramped quarters was heavy, filled with unspoken tension. Mark and Velza sat on opposite sides of the room, their earlier argument still lingering between them like a bad smell. The faint hum of Velza's handheld scanner was the only sound, cutting through the eerie silence that had overtaken the ship. "This is pointless," Mark finally muttered, tossing a wrench onto the nearby table. "We're stuck in here while the rest of the ship is falling apart. How are we supposed to fix anything from this glorified closet?" Velza didn't look up from her scanner. "Complaining won't fix the blackout. Williams. Focus." Mark rolled his eyes but said nothing. Instead, he stared at the emergency console on the wall, its dim red glow casting strange shadows across the room. Something about the panel seemed off. "Hey," Mark said, sitting up. "Do you see that?" Velza sighed. "See what?" "That console. The one above the comm station. Doesn't it look misaligned?" Velza glanced up, her sharp eyes narrowing. She rose gracefully from her seat, her scanner still in hand, and approached the panel. You might actually be right for once." Mark ignored the jab and joined her. Together, they inspected the panel, which was slightly recessed into the wall, as if someone had tampered with it. "This doesn't match the ship's schematics," Velza said, running her scanner over the surface. "There's something behind it." Mark grabbed his toolkit and pulled out a small crowbar. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Velza stepped back, allowing him to wedge the crowbar into the seam. With a grunt, Mark pried the panel loose, revealing a small, hidden compartment. "What the hell?" Mark muttered, peering inside. The compartment was no larger than a storage locker, but its contents were anything but ordinary. Nestled within was a strange metallic device that pulsed faintly with green light. Its surface was covered in intricate alien markings, shifting and shimmering like they were alive. Velza's breath caught. That isn't human tech." "No kidding," Mark said, staring at the device. "Is it Srixian?" Velza shook her head, her usually confident expression replaced with unease. "No, and I've never seen anything like it before." Mark hesitated before reaching out toward the device. Maybe it's a backup power source. Something experimental the captain didn't tell us about. "Don't touch it," Velza snapped, grabbing his wrist. Mark froze, his hand hovering inches from the device. "Why not? It could help us figure out what's going on. Or it could kill us," Velza shot back. "We have no idea what it is or what it's capable of." Mark pulled his hand back reluctantly. "Fine. So, what do we do?" "Just stare at it." Velza crouched beside the compartment, her scanner emitting a series of rapid beeps as she pointed it at the device. Her brow furrowed. "It's emitting the same signal I detected earlier. The one from the cargo hold." Mark's stomach sank. "So it's connected to the Blackout." "Possibly," Velza said. "But there's more. The energy signature. It's alive." Mark blinked. "Alive? What does that even mean?" Velza stood, her voice tight. "It means this isn't just a machine. It's something more. And if it's alive, then it might be aware of us." Before Mark could respond, the device pulsed brightly, flooding the room with an eerie green glow. A low, resonant hum filled the air, vibrating through their bones. "Back away," Velza shouted, pulling Mark toward the far side of the room. As they retreated, the glow dimmed and the hum subsided. The room fell silent once more, but the air felt heavier, charged with an unseen tension. "That wasn't random," Velza said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It reacted to us." Mark's mind raced. If it's alive, then what does it want? Velza didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on the device, her normally sharp features shadowed by uncertainty. Then, from somewhere deep within the ship, the rhythmic tapping returned. This time, it was louder, and much closer. Mark's heart pounded as he grabbed his flashlight, his eyes darting to the door. "Tell me that's just more cooling systems shutting down." Velza's grip tightened on her scanner. "It's not." The tapping grew louder, more deliberate, echoing through the corridors like a predator stalking its prey. Mark turned to Velza, his voice low and urgent. "We need to get out of here. Now." Velza nodded, but her gaze lingered on the device. "If this thing is causing the blackout, we can't just leave it here." "Fine. Then grab it," Mark said, opening the door a crack to peek into the hallway. Velza hesitated before carefully lifting the device from the compartment. It was heavier than it looked, its surface warm to the touch. The green light pulsed faintly, as if in response to her movement. "Got it," she said, her voice strained. "Let's go." Together, they stepped into the shadowy corridor, the device's faint glow casting eerie patterns on the walls. The tapping noise had stopped, but the silence that followed was somehow worse. Mark gripped his flashlight tightly, his knuckles white. "Whatever's on this ship, it's not friendly." Velza nodded, her expression grim. "And I think it knows we found this. Trust under pressure." The distant clang of metal reverberated through the ship, the sound cutting through the silence like a blade. Mark and Velza stood frozen in the dim hallway, their breaths shallow, their gazes locked on the end of the corridor. Whatever was out there wasn't hiding anymore. "We can't keep running," Mark muttered, gripping the wrench in his hand. "If it catches up, we're toast." Velza, holding the alien device tightly against her chest, shot him a sharp look. "You think standing still is a better idea. We don't even know what we're up against." Mark sighed, his frustration barely contained. "And whose fault is that? Maybe if we didn't stop every 5 seconds to analyze this thing, we'd be at the engine room by now." Velza's eyes narrowed. "This thing is the only lead we have, or would you prefer blindly wandering the ship while it hunts us?" Another clang echoed, this time closer. Both of them instinctively backed toward the wall, the argument dying in their throats. The faint green glow from the device cast shifting shadows that seemed to move on their own. "Fine," Mark whispered, his grip tightening on the wrench. But if we're going to keep playing tag with this thing, we need a plan. Velza nodded reluctantly. Agreed. First, we need to secure this device. If it's causing the blackout, the captain needs to see it. Mark snorted. The captain? Do you really think she's still alive? We haven't heard from anyone since this all started. Velza hesitated, her confident exterior cracking just slightly. She has to be. The eclipse is too large for us to assume we're the only survivors. Until we know otherwise, we stick to protocol. Protocol, Mark muttered, shaking his head. Yeah, that'll save us. The alien device hummed softly in her arms, almost as if it were responding to the tension between them. Its light pulsed faintly, casting eerie patterns on Velza's face. All right, Mark said after a moment, forcing himself to calm down. Let's move. Slowly, quietly. They crept down the corridor, Velza's scanner leading the way. The rhythmic tapping they had heard earlier was gone, but the oppressive silence felt worse. Every step felt too loud, every shadow seemed alive. Mark's nerves were on edge, but Velza remained focused, scanning the walls and ceilings as they moved. After a few minutes, they reached a maintenance junction. Mark checked the map on his tablet. We're 2 decks below the auxiliary control room. If we take the service ladder, we can. A loud bang from behind them cut him off. The sound was unmistakable, something heavy slamming into metal. Velza spun around, her eyes wide. It's coming. Mark didn't need to be told twice. Ladder. Now. They sprinted down the narrow passage, their boots echoing in the confined space. The banging grew louder, closer. Whatever was chasing them wasn't just fast, it was relentless. Up here, Mark shouted, yanking open a hatch that led to the service ladder. He climbed up first, motioning for Velza to follow. She hesitated for a split second, glancing down the hallway. The shadows at the far end twisted unnaturally, and she could have sworn she saw movement, something tall and spindly, its limbs too long to be human. Velza, come on, Mark shouted from above. Snapping out of her daze, she scrambled up the ladder, clutching the device tightly. The moment she was clear, Mark slammed the hatch shut and locked it. Do you think that'll hold? She asked, her breathing ragged. Not for long, Mark admitted, leaning against the wall. They were in a dimly lit crawlspace now, barely high enough for them to stand upright. The air was stale, and the faint hum of the alien device filled the silence. We need to figure this out, Mark said after a moment. If that thing is tracking us, it's not by accident. What's so special about this device? Velza crouched, placing the device on the floor between them. She activated her scanner, her sharp eyes darting over the readings. It's emitting some kind of signal, but it's not consistent, almost like it's searching for something. Searching for what? Mark asked, wiping sweat from his brow. I don't know, Velza admitted, but I think it's what's drawing that thing to us. Mark stared at the glowing object, his frustration boiling over. Great, so we're carrying a giant homing beacon. Fantastic. Velza glared at him. It's also the only clue we have. If we can figure out how it works, maybe we can use it against whatever's hunting us. Mark was about to argue when the banging started again, this time directly beneath them. We don't have time for theories, Mark hissed. We need action. Velza's eyes narrowed. All right, you want action. Let's set a trap. Mark blinked. A trap? For that thing? Are you insane? Do you have a better idea? Velza shot back. If we can lure it into a confined space, we can use the device too. I don't know, overload it or disrupt its signal. Mark hesitated, but the banging grew louder, closer. The creature was climbing. Fine, he said, grabbing his toolkit. But if this goes sideways, I'm blaming you. Velza smirked faintly, her confidence returning. Deal. Now let's get to work. The two of them quickly began assembling a makeshift trap, their earlier animosity forgotten as the urgency of the situation took over. As they worked, The creature's movements grew louder, the sound echoing through the walls. Mark's heart pounded, but he forced himself to focus. "Ready?" Velza asked, holding the device like it was a live grenade. Mark nodded, gripping his wrench like a weapon. "Ready." The creature was coming. They only had one shot, the enemy within. The ship's silence was no longer peaceful. It was predatory. Every shadow seemed deeper, every sound sharper. Mark and Velza crouched in the tight confines of the maintenance crawlspace, their trap set and their nerves stretched to the breaking point. But it wasn't the silence that unnerved Mark the most. It was the whispers. They started faint, just at the edge of his hearing. Words he couldn't quite make out, like fragments of thoughts brushing against his mind. At first, he thought he was imagining it, but the longer they lingered, the harder they were to ignore. "Do you hear that?" Mark whispered, his voice barely audible. Velza glanced at him, frowning. "Hear what?" "The voices," Mark said, feeling ridiculous even as he said it. "Like someone's whispering." Velza's frown deepened. "I don't hear anything." "Are you sure you're—" She stopped abruptly, her eyes widening as she looked past him. Mark turned, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. The corridor leading into their crawlspace was empty, but something was wrong. The air seemed to ripple like heat waves on a hot road, distorting the faint light around it. "It's here," Velza whispered, clutching the alien device tighter. Its green glow pulsed rapidly, almost frantically, as if it too could sense the approaching danger. Mark's pulse quickened. "Stick to the plan. We lure it into the trap, then we make a run for it." Velza nodded, but her gaze remained fixed on the corridor. The rippling air began to take shape, tall, angular, and grotesquely elongated. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, its limbs too long, its movements too fluid. Mark's brain struggled to process what he was seeing. "Don't freeze," Velza hissed, snapping him out of his daze. "Get ready." Mark swallowed hard and adjusted the wrench in his grip. He had rigged the trap as best he could, using the alien device as bait. If it worked, the trap would release an electromagnetic pulse strong enough to stun whatever this thing was, assuming it had any kind of tech-based biology. The creature stepped fully into view now, its shadow stretching unnaturally across the walls. It didn't have eyes, but Mark felt its attention lock onto them, like a predator sizing up prey. The whispers in his head grew louder, more insistent. Mark clenched his jaw, trying to block them out, but the words were slippery, like they were burrowing directly into his thoughts. "Mark," Velza said sharply, drawing his focus back to the moment. "Now." Mark hit the makeshift trigger on the trap, and the corridor exploded with light. A sharp electrical hum filled the air as the device unleashed a pulse of energy, rippling outward in a visible shockwave. The creature staggered, its form flickering like a hologram struggling to stay solid. For a moment, Mark thought they'd won. Then the whispers turned into a scream. It wasn't a sound he heard with his ears. It was inside his head, a piercing, inhuman shriek that made him drop to his knees, clutching his skull. Velza staggered as well, her expression twisted in pain, but she didn't let go of the alien device. The creature lunged, its distorted form closing the distance between them in an instant. Mark barely had time to react before Velza shoved him out of the way, raising the device between her and the creature like a shield. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice trembling but fierce. The device pulsed again, brighter this time, and the creature recoiled, its form glitching violently. Mark scrambled to his feet, his head still pounding from the mental assault. "What's happening?" he yelled. Velza didn't answer. Her focus was entirely on the device, which was now glowing so brightly it lit up the entire crawlspace. The creature backed away, its movements jerky and unnatural, as if the light was physically painful to it. "It's working," Velza said through gritted teeth. "The device is disrupting it." Mark's relief was short-lived. The whispers in his head returned, but now they weren't chaotic. They were clear. "You cannot stop me," the voice said, deep and resonant. "You are already mine." Mark's blood ran cold. He looked at Velza, who was staring at him with wide eyes. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice shaking. Velza shook her head. "Hear what?" Before he could explain, the creature let out a guttural, alien sound and vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only a faint, acrid smell. Mark and Velza stood frozen, the glow of the device dimming to its normal, steady pulse. The trap had worked, but not in the way they'd expected. "It's not gone," Velza said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just waiting." Mark nodded, still hearing the echo of the voice in his mind. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just a physical threat. It was something far worse. "We need answers," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. "And we need them fast." Velza looked at him, her sharp eyes unreadable. "Then let's find out what this device is really hiding." The trap. The hum of the alien device filled the small compartment where Mark and Velza huddled, its faint green glow casting shifting shadows on the walls. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the silence outside felt like the calm before a storm. They had been sitting there for minutes, maybe hours, but the weight of the situation made time blur. Mark tapped the wrench against his thigh, the rhythmic motion doing little to calm his nerves. "Tell me again why this trap is going to work," he said, his voice low. Velza didn't look up from the alien device. Her long, slender fingers adjusted the controls on her scanner, the light from the screen reflecting in her sharp eyes. "Because I calibrated the signal to mimic whatever this thing is looking for," she replied. "It's drawn to the frequency. All we have to do is wait." Mark leaned back against the wall, his unease growing. "And when it shows up, what then?" "Shake hands. Offer it a tour of the ship." Velza shot him a glare. "The electromagnetic pulse will disable it. If it's tech-based. If not, we improvise." "Improvise," Mark muttered, shaking his head. "Great plan. I feel super confident." The faint tapping noise returned, cutting through their tense conversation like a knife. It was distant but deliberate, the same sound they had been hearing since the blackout began. Mark tensed, his grip tightening on the wrench. "It's here," Velza whispered, her voice barely audible. The tapping grew louder, echoing through the corridors, accompanied by an unnatural scraping sound. Mark's heart raced as he strained to see down the shadowy hallway leading to their location. "Remember," Velza said, her voice calm but firm, "don't engage until it's inside the trap." "Got it," Mark replied, his voice betraying his nerves. The sound stopped suddenly, and the silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, Mark wondered if the creature had changed its mind. But then the faint ripple in the air began to form at the edge of the corridor. It moved differently this time. Slower, more calculated. Its tall, distorted form shifted in and out of focus, as if the creature itself was unstable, barely clinging to reality. But its presence was unmistakable, a pressure in the air that made Mark's skin crawl. "It's reacting to the signal," Velza said, her tone sharp with focus. She adjusted the device, causing it to emit a stronger pulse. The green light flickered, casting the creature's shadow grotesquely across the walls. The creature stopped just outside the trap's perimeter, its elongated limbs twitching unnaturally. For a moment, it simply stood there, its eyeless face turned toward them. "Why isn't it moving?" Mark hissed. Velza's fingers flew over the controls of her scanner. "It's analyzing. It knows this isn't what it was expecting." Mark's knuckles widened as he gripped the wrench tighter. "So, what do we do if it doesn't fall for the bait?" Velza didn't answer. Her focus was on the creature, watching every subtle shift in its form. Then, without warning, it lunged forward, crossing into the trap. "Now!" Velza shouted. Mark slammed his hand onto the makeshift trigger, and the room erupted with light and sound. The electromagnetic pulse rippled through the air, distorting the creature's form. It let out an ear-splitting shriek, a sound that wasn't just physical but mental, slicing into their thoughts like a knife. Mark fell to his knees, clutching his head as the sound tore through his mind. "Make it stop," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the noise. Velza, trembling but still focused, adjusted the device, amplifying the pulse. The green glow intensified, and the creature began to glitch violently, its form breaking apart like shattered glass. "It's working," Velza yelled. But then the creature did something they hadn't anticipated. Instead of retreating or collapsing, it reached out with one of its distorted limbs, wrapping it around the alien device. "No," Velza screamed, trying to pull the device away, but the creature's strength was overwhelming. The device emitted a high-pitched whine, its glow flickering erratically. Mark scrambled to his feet, his fear giving way to raw determination. He swung the wrench with all his strength, striking the creature's limb. The impact sent a shockwave up his arm, but the creature didn't flinch. "Velza, let it go," Mark shouted. "I can't," she snapped, her voice strained. "If it gets the device." The device emitted another pulse, brighter and louder than before, and the creature let out a guttural roar. It released the device and staggered backward, its form flickering uncontrollably. "Now's our chance," Mark yelled, grabbing Velza by the arm. The two of them bolted down the corridor, leaving the trap behind. The creature's distorted screams echoed after them, growing fainter with each step. When they finally stopped, gasping for air, Mark turned to Velza. "What the hell was that?" It's like it knew what the device was. Velza's face was pale, her usual confidence shaken. It didn't just know. It was trying to use it. "That thing. It's not just hunting us. It's learning." Mark stared at her, his mind racing. "Then this isn't just a malfunction. This whole blackout, it's a setup." Velza nodded grimly, her gaze fixed on the faint green glow of the device in her hands. "And we're playing right into its hands." Escape and revelation. The ship groaned like a wounded beast, its metal frame echoing with sounds that didn't belong. Clangs, creaks, and something worse. Mark and Velza stood at the edge of the auxiliary control room, their breaths ragged, their nerves frayed. Behind them, the creature's distorted shrieks still echoed, growing louder with every passing second. The alien device in Velza's hands pulsed erratically, its green glow flickering like a dying star. It was unstable, and both of them knew it. "This is it," Mark said, his voice tight. "We either end this thing now, or we don't leave this ship alive." Velza nodded, her sharp eyes scanning the control panels. The auxiliary systems had partially rebooted, but they were barely functioning. Wires dangled from the ceiling, sparking intermittently, and the room smelled of burnt circuitry. "We need to overload the device," Velza said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "If I can amplify its signal through the ship's core, it might generate a feedback loop strong enough to destroy whatever that thing is." "Destroy it?" Mark repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Or make it mad enough to tear us apart? Do you have a better idea?" Velza snapped, already moving toward the control console. Mark sighed and shook his head. "Nope. Let's fry it." Velza placed the device on the central console, its glow intensifying as she connected it to the ship's main systems. The room was bathed in green light, the hum of the device growing louder with every second. Mark stood by the door, gripping his wrench like a lifeline, his eyes fixed on the hallway. "Whatever you're doing, do it fast," he said. "It's coming." Velza's fingers flew across the controls, her precision remarkable despite the situation. "I need 30 seconds to calibrate the energy flow. Just hold it off until then." "Hold it off," Mark muttered under his breath. "Sure, I'll just ask it nicely to wait." The creature's shadow appeared at the end of the corridor, tall and jagged, its form rippling unnaturally. Mark's stomach churned as he raised his wrench, his hands slick with sweat. The whispers returned, louder this time, digging into his mind like claws. "Mark," the voice said, deep and resonant, almost human. You can't win. He gritted his teeth, shaking his head to drown it out. Not listening to you, he muttered. Not today. The creature lunged forward, its elongated limbs scraping against the walls. Mark swung the wrench with all his strength, the impact sending a jolt up his arm. The creature recoiled, its form glitching violently, but it recovered too quickly. Velza, 30 seconds is a luxury we don't have, he shouted. Almost there, Velza yelled back, her voice strained. The device was glowing so brightly now that it hurt to look at. Just keep it away from the console. The creature lunged again, this time faster. Mark barely dodged, stumbling as it swiped at him with a claw-like appendage. Sparks flew as the claw tore into the metal wall behind him. Any time now, Velza, he yelled, scrambling to his feet. Done, Velza shouted. Get back here. Mark didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted toward her as the creature charged, its distorted form stretching unnaturally, its shrieks filling the room. Velza slammed her hand down on the console, and the ship's lights flickered violently as the alien device released a deafening pulse of energy. The creature froze mid-lunge, its body convulsing as the pulse washed over it. Its form flickered and fractured, pieces of it tearing away like shards of glass. It let out a final, inhuman scream before collapsing into a puddle of black, viscous liquid that hissed and bubbled on the floor. The room went silent, save for the crackling of the fried circuits. Mark and Velza stood still, their breaths heavy, their bodies tense. Is it dead? Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Velza stared at the black liquid, her scanner in hand. I don't know, she admitted, but it's gone. For now. Mark let out a shaky laugh, leaning against the console. You know, next time I sign up for a mission, I'm asking about the killer glitch monster's claws. Velza didn't laugh. Her focus was on the device, which had gone dark, its once brilliant glow extinguished. This wasn't a random malfunction, she said, her voice low. That thing, it wasn't just some anomaly. It was intelligent. Mark frowned. Intelligent? You mean, it knew what it was doing? Velza nodded grimly. It was using the ship. The blackout, the signals, it was all a setup. And this device, it's part of something much bigger. Mark stared at her, his unease growing. Bigger? Like what? Velza's scanner beeped, and her eyes widened as she read the data. There are more signals, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Dozens of them, on other ships. Mark's blood ran cold. You're saying this wasn't an isolated incident? Velza nodded, her expression grim. Whatever this is, it's not over. This was just the beginning. The ship's lights flickered again, and the comms panel crackled to life, the captain's voice faint but audible. Crew of the Eclipse, report to the bridge immediately. Mark and Velza exchanged a glance. Whatever was waiting for them next, they would face it together.